We have more folks joining. We'll wait just one more minute before we go ahead and get started with our briefing today. I know we have a lot of important information to share, so I'll make sure everyone has an opportunity to log in. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I still see that there's a few more folks that keep entering. Welcome to everybody for our Voices of AAPI community briefing. We have exciting information to share with everyone today. So welcome back if you've been joining us for these briefings in the past, and welcome if this is your first time joining us as well. My name is Sarah Sadwani. I'm an associate professor of political science at Pomona College and also a senior researcher at AAPI Data. We have critical insights and untimely policy issues impacting our nation that we're going to be sharing with you today. I'd like to thank all of our partners, of course, AAPI Data, but also APIAVote, Asian American Journalists Association, and NCAPA for today's briefing, as well as our ongoing partnership with the Associated Press and NORC. The Voices of AAPI briefings are an incredibly important resource of data and insights for our communities. And I am thrilled to be welcoming so many of our speakers that are going to be joining us today. We'll hear from many of them later on in the program, but we have Christy Choi from APIAVote, Tui Nguyen from OCA National, Greg Orton from NCAPA, and of course, our very own Karthik Ramakrishnan, the founder and executive director of AAPI Data. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Karthik, to take us through all of the data that we have to share for today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here and to share these exciting and important results. And just for context, what we have today are important findings about what it means to be Asian American and Pacific Islander in America on the occasion of its 250th anniversary, including key questions about where we stand on America's standing in the world, on what kind of place is it for immigrants and some key concerns as we head to this important anniversary. Let's go to the next slide, please. So you can find this report on our website. It's a survey report published by API Data, Associated Press, and NORC. And if you just go to apidata.com/surveys or the link that's been shared in the chat, you can find it. Now, we also update our Voices of Community by the Numbers resource guide. Now, this guide is unlike the other guides that we have on our site, which are topically focused. This focuses on public opinion data more generally, and then we update it with the latest topics. So it's a one-stop place if you don't want to go through and click on every single one of our surveys. And by now, we have dozens of surveys on our site. Let's go to the next slide. So let's dive into it. So the methods, this is a national probability sample built on the Amplify AAPI panel. The survey was fielded in the end of April with over 1,000 respondents, and the overall margin of error is plus or minus 4.4 points. And we will be presenting disaggregated data here, but for all the questions, you'll see that on our website following the webinar. Next slide. So some key findings. One, and this is possibly the most important one, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are personally affected by the immigration crackdown. Compared to one-third of the general population, about a half of APIs report that they or someone they know has experienced one or more of the following: started carrying documentation proving their immigration status or citizenship, changing their travel plans, significantly altering their daily routines, or facing detention or deportation due to immigration status. Now, some of these are much more common than others. The most common one is carrying proof of immigration or citizenship status. That's at 41% for AAPIs. And among South Asians, it's even higher at 53%. This is important to flag because we think that the perpetual foreigner status might be primed by anti-China rhetoric or maybe legacy lingering effects of anti-Asian racism during COVID. But it's possible and likely that the kind of resentment being whipped up against high-skilled immigration, H-1Bs, and the war with Iran likely accounts for the higher level of behavior among South Asians carrying around things like their passports, birth certificates, etc., visas, and the like. The results are somewhat higher for Latinos, but on par at 48%, and it's lower among Black and white adults. Next major finding, 64% of APIs say that the US used to be a great place for immigrants, but is not anymore. And this is similar to the national average. Next slide. On American identity, API adults value the American dream, a democratically elected government, and mixing of global cultures and values as central to US identity. Surprisingly, shockingly, it's actually higher than the US average on many of these measures. Just 2 in 10 view a culture established by early European immigrants or grounded in Christian ideals as key to US national identity, and this is lower than the general population. So, if anything, APIs are firmer believers in American ideals that are not grounded in race or religion than the US population. 58% of APIs considered extremely important or very important for immigrants living in the US to maintain their culture and traditions. And then finally, more API adults than the general public say that their family's ancestry and their race or ethnicity are extremely important or very important to their personal identity. So the composite picture is APIs believe in a multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious America, and they believe that it's important for them to hold on to their traditions, even as you see support for English, learning English and blending into the larger society. Let's go dig deeper. Next slide. So, views on America. So, API adults hold a pluralistic view of American identity. I'm not going to read all of this, and I'll just show you through the data. APIs are similar to the US average on America's global standing. So, it's not that APIs think that the US is less of a global leader than the rest of the US population does, very much on par. And API adults are feeling ambivalent about the 250th anniversary. Next slide. So, when you compare, one of the great things when we partner with the Associated Press and NORC is we're able to compare our population to the US population whenever we coordinate on survey questions. And this was one example of that. We knew that America's 250th was an important occasion, and it'll be important to try to replicate as many questions as we could. So when you talk about achieving the American dream, 80% of API adults say that it's extremely important or very important as a part of US identity. For US adults, it's at 71%. Democratically elected government, just take a look at that. 79% of APIs say that it's essential to US national identity, while only 66% of Americans do. Multiculturalism, 73% among APIs, 55% among the general population. And then finally, if you look at the bottom, a culture established by the country's early European immigrants, 21% for APIs, slightly higher among US adults, 28%. A culture grounded in Christian religious beliefs, 20% of APIs say that it's extremely or very important to US identity, 37%. Over a third of American adults today say that a culture grounded in Christian religious beliefs is essential to US national identity. Next slide. Now, when it comes to the anniversary itself, API adults are split on their feelings, and it's similar to the US population with one exception when it comes to the feeling of pride. So 43% of US adults say they feel proud. where about a third of APIs say they feel proud. But other feelings are just as prevalent, including feelings of indifference, feeling conflicted, as well as feeling excited. Next slide. In terms of America's standing in the world, API adults are less likely than US adults, but not by much, to say that the US stands above all other countries in the world. The dominant sentiment is the US is one of the greatest countries in the world, along with some others. So the patterns are very similar between APIs and the rest of the population. Next slide. Now, in terms of whether the US is still a great place for immigrants, what we find are some differences by ethnicity, where Vietnamese are more likely than Koreans, for example, although this is within the margin of error. You see some difference across ethnicity, but the differences are not dramatic. The dominant sentiment is the US used to be a great place for immigrants, but is not anymore. Next slide. By the way, these findings should all be a flashing warning sign, maybe a bright flashing warning sign in terms of how APIs view America today, both in its standing in the world and as a place that is welcoming of immigrants. On immigration, APIs are personally affected by the immigration crackdown, and I'll go into some detailed findings. On the question of assimilation or cultural preservation, the answer is it's both and. API adults value both gains in English proficiency as well as cultural preservation. On the question of birthright citizenship, the picture is a bit complicated. Now, it's unlikely that the US Supreme Court will be adopting a perspective of trying to split hairs in terms of who is going to be granted birthright citizenship. But what this points to is a potential move in the future if Congress wants to tighten, either through law or through a constitutional amendment, for the kinds of children born to parents and to start carving out exceptions to what appears to be a rock solid and broad guarantee of citizenship for anyone born on US soil. Next slide. So when it comes to altering one's behavior, as I'd mentioned before, started carrying proof of immigration status or US citizenship, 41% for API adults, 25% for US adults. Changing travel plans because of immigration status, 34% of API adults compared to 18% of US adults. Similar patterns on significantly changing routines because of immigration status. And to be clear, when it says been detained or deported, it's not just themselves, but someone they know. And that's true for all of these indicators. So we replicated the question that the Associated Press and NORC had. And the way I interpret it is that people are personally affected either directly or indirectly through someone they know. One should not interpret this as a direct effect. It is very likely an overestimate, right? Because it includes the indirect effect as well, or the indirect experience. Next slide. In terms of ethnicity, we see this among South Asians more generally and among Asian Indians in particular. 53% say that they've started carrying proof of immigration status or US citizenship over this, or either themselves or someone they know has started doing so. Pacific Islanders are less likely than Asian Americans to say that they themselves or someone they know personally has done this. Next slide. There are some important differences. Women more likely than men to say that they have experienced this either directly or indirectly. And interestingly and importantly, those aged 18 to 34 are more likely than those 65 and older to say this. We also see partisan differences here on this measure. Next slide. In terms of changing travel plans, again, you see South Asians more so than others, saying that they have either directly or indirectly affected by this. Again, Pacific Islanders less so than Asian Americans. Next slide. And again, this goes counter to stereotype or expectations, where you see the highest prevalence is among those 18 to 34. And that possibly has something to do with what racial profiling might look like within our population and how it intersects with age and perceived threat. Next slide. Next, we have questions about both assimilation and cultural maintenance. And as I had said before, this is a both and kind of situation. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders believe that it's important to maintain culture and tradition and to speak English fluently. They also, in very similar proportions, believe it's important to maintain language spoken at home and blend into American society. So there is no disconnect here in wanting to be part of America and to believe in the importance of speaking English fluently and maintaining language spoken at home and cultural traditions. Next slide. So in terms of maintaining language spoken at home, we do see some differences by ethnicity, and this is largely a reflection of Indian Americans who are among those immigrants who have arrived in larger numbers over the last 20 years, and Japanese Americans who are a predominantly native-born community. But for other groups, you don't see much in the way of differences that are statistically significant. Next, and importantly for Pacific Islanders too, you see a high priority there. Next slide. In terms of differences by gender, women more so than men say that it's important to maintain language spoken at home. And then interestingly, you might have thought, I thought before looking at this data that seniors would be more likely to say that it's important to maintain language spoken at home. But we see this emphasis across the board, and if anything, a lower proportion among those age 65 plus. Finally, we see some partisan differences here as well. Next slide. Similar to maintaining language spoken at home, maintaining cultures and traditions, we see this as a priority across the board in terms of race and ethnicity within our community. Next slide. And for other differences, the differences are not as big as we saw on language spoken at home when it comes to gender or age, but on age, you still see that difference. Again, surprising to see that high prevalence among those age 18 to 34. And this time around on party ID, independents are aligned with Democrats and Republicans less likely to say that it's extremely important or very important for immigrants to maintain their culture and traditions. Next slide. On birthright citizenship, the patterns among Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are similar to the rest of the population. And what we see is, so we asked, this is the way the question was worded. It's important to dig into this. The question says, the United States currently grants citizenship to all children born in the United States. Do you think that the United States should or should not grant citizenship automatically to, and then here are the findings. When we ask about all children born in the US, about 2/3 say yes, similar to the US population. About children born in the US to parents who are in the country legally on work visas, 81% compared to 70% overall. Now, some in our community might see that as a good thing, but note that 17% say no, and potential there for ongoing community engagement to show what that might imply, including those who are on multiple H-1B renewals and for their children born in the country not automatically getting US citizenship. In terms of children born in the US to parents who are in the country legally on tourist visas, 56% say yes, automatic granting of citizenship, similar to the US average at 58%. And then for those born in the country to parents who are in the country illegally, 54% in our community, 49% overall. So this points to potential future policy developments and the need for community organizations who have strong opinions on this to engage our communities to make sure that we are well informed about what the implications are. Next slide. Finally, on personal identity, go through this fairly quickly so we can get to our panel. Let's go to the next slide. Heritage and family are cornerstones to our community's identity. API adults use multiple terms to describe themselves with no single label that is dominant. And then identity salience varies meaningfully by gender, age, and party. And this is something we'll see in the slides here, but also, as I mentioned, in the disaggregated data that we'll be sharing after this webinar on our website. Next slide. So more API adults than US adults say that their ancestry and ethnicity are extremely important or very important to their personal identity, right? So when you say your family's ancestry or country of origin, 55% of API adults say extremely important, very important, compared to 37% of the general population. Race and ethnicity, 54% in our community compared to 36% overall in the US. Gender also matters in terms of those who say extremely important or very important. And the pattern is similar to the US population, about a half. In terms of your religion, slightly less important in our community than in the overall population. And being an American, slightly less important in our community at 44% compared to 55% for the general population. Next slide. In terms of the importance of family's ancestry to personal identity, we see a higher proportion of women than men. But again, this finding by age surprises me to see a significant proportion of those age 18 to 34, even higher than those age 65 plus, saying that their family's ancestry is extremely important or very important to their personal identity. And then we see some partisan differences here as well, with Democrats more likely to say so than independents or Republicans. Next slide. In terms of the terms that people use, the question was, people use different terms to describe themselves. How often do you use the following terms? And we see that Asian or Pacific Islander or American or their ethnicity are about as frequent. Actually, even Asian American or Pacific Islander American. So all of those cluster. Less frequent are regional groupings like South Asian, East Asian, Southeast Asian, Polynesian, or some other regional group, or their ethnicity's name combined with American, like Chinese American or Indian American. And then the lowest is a person of color, is a term that they use to describe themselves. Next slide. So before we jump to our speakers, I'll just say to summarize, we have a wealth of data here about American identity, America's standing in the world, people's own priority when it comes to certain aspects of immigration policy, their experiences with the immigration crackdown, and important questions about their own personal identity. So we hope you find this illuminative. I think there's some important calls to action that come out of this, and I know our speakers will have thoughts to share about that. So over to you, Sarah.
Great. Wow. Thank you so much, Karthik. This is just really fascinating stuff. Even just this last slide, thinking about the use of the term people of color really stands out to me. Sometimes the terms that we tend to use amongst ourselves and as community groups just really aren't necessarily what it is that's resonating with people each and every day. And such important questions right now, especially given this moment where we're commemorating the 250th anniversary of the United States. I'm going to stop talking and bring in so many of our incredible speakers that we have with us today. Again, if you've only just joined us or been joined us kind of partway through, Christy Choi from APIAVote, Tu Nguyen from OCA National, and Greg Orton from NCAPA are now joining us to talk through some of this data. And I want to start and really think about the chilling effect that immigration has been playing for so many Asian American and Pacific Islanders. The data really show this stark reality regarding the current immigration climate, with 64% of AAPI adults stating that the US used to be a great place for immigrants, but is not anymore. That's a quite a striking finding. Greg, perhaps we can start with you and maybe share a little bit, just in terms of the policy perspective, on all the different ways that the Trump administration is harming immigrants and America through these various policies. I mean, that's clearly something that is coming out of this data, and I'm curious to hear your reactions.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thanks API Data for organizing us today. Look, there's a lot to unpack there, and not just that stat about how attitudes about America was once good for immigrants and maybe less so today. You know, that 51% of API is reporting that they are themselves or they know someone who now carries around documentation. To me, that's perhaps even more sobering. That's one in two of our community members saying that. And for me, when you really kind of zoom out and think about just all, we could talk about the policies, we could talk about the executive orders, we could talk about the almost $250 billion of funding we've given to ICE in order to continue to expand those operations. But for me, especially when reflecting on America's 250th, it is it's screaming very loudly that one of the defining characteristics of this current administration and leaders in DC is by governing through fear, right? Americans, APIs are afraid to go outside without documentation. Communities of color are, especially Black communities, are especially fearful of whether or not law enforcement or state violence will result in themselves or their families being killed. And it's something we've been talking about for quite some time, and certainly in DC as well. There's this fear and uncertainty about the future, right? And the future for your family. So while DC is passing laws and passing regulations that help the rich get richer, everyday Americans are watching the cost of living and healthcare skyrocket. And that fear is palpable. And there's a reason why it keeps coming up. There's a reason why it continues to show up in our national discourse. And so, yes, the immigration policies of the current administration has fundamentally reshaped many immigrant communities' view of how they can move through their own communities and how they can lead their own lives. But this idea of, as we approach America's 250th birthday, to have so many Americans fearful of the future, I think it's incredibly sobering.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Greg. I'm going to bring in two into this conversation. And you had mentioned, this stat around carrying proof of citizenship. Alarmingly, right, half of AAPI adults reporting that they or someone that they know has changed their behavior due to their immigration status and now carrying proof of citizenship. 34% changing travel, significantly changing daily routines, like avoiding work or school. Like you said, very much a chilling findings. To you're joining us today from OCA. Does this data support what you're hearing from chapters around the country? From a civil rights perspective at OCA National, what on the ground support structures are most urgently needed for community members who are changing their daily lives out of fear? And how can policy makers that might be in the audience, how can they help alleviate some of these anxieties from your perspective?
Thanks for the question, Sarah. OCA represents over 35 chapters and affiliates across the country in 24 states. And for those of you who know OCA more intimately, we've been around for 53 years. Like, among our membership includes multi-generational Chinese Americans. And so, it's Karthik had mentioned that this data point is a red flag. It's an incredible red flag to us when multi-generational Chinese Americans in the Midwest are calling up OCA National's headquarters asking for know your rights resources in case they're picked up by ICE officers, and asking us what the proper documentation they should be carrying, right? And this fear, I think, doesn't just come from all of the anti-Chinese rhetoric coming from the government in this push against the CCP, but it started even with the president's executive order trying to end birthright citizenship, right? As soon as that executive order came out last January, we had community members, my own family members, calling me up asking me, what does this mean for us now? Should we be carrying our birth certificates around? And then we've been working with our partners to put out resources, because you don't necessarily want police to be able to, or law enforcement to be able to search your phone without a warrant. And so if you're carrying your documentation as a photo on your phone, that may not be the best idea as well. And so chapters across the country and our community members in general, besides looking for know your rights resources, they are in need of who to contact. Who do they call to? Because everybody's situation is different, right? For citizens, asylum seekers, anyone who has temporary protected status, temporary status, all of their situations are all different. And so the kinds of paperwork they should be carrying, or how they should be carrying it, and what kind of information should you be comfortable sharing with someone who stops you. That's all really on a case-by-case basis. And we've been just trying to connect our chapters and members with lawyers who we know, and trying to put that information out there for folks. And so I think for policymakers, any kind of public reassurance, right? Like whether you can fight back against this culture of fear and fight back against the perpetual foreigner stereotype, the move towards exclusion acts again, any kind of local policies, public reassurance, public messaging, and sentiments is really key here, because the fear that is in everybody's minds, and other people looking at our community members as a foreigner, that's all public sentiment, public messaging. And so as long as our elected leaders can also just reinforce that we are Americans, and push back against this perpetual foreigner stereotyping, that would be my call to action for electeds.
That's really important, an important piece for the policymakers amongst us, that to really be thinking about the communication side of this moment and this political crisis. Speaking of which, thinking a little bit about communications, we happen to have the communications director for APIAVote, Christy Choi, with us. I want to think a little bit, move the conversation along just a little bit, to think a little bit about political divisions and democracy, because one of the other sides that this survey revealed was that 79% of AAPI adults consider a democratically elected governor to be a core part of the state's identity. But at the same time, when asked what divides Americans, 31% of AAPI adults pointed to political interests and values as being that primary culprit. So, Christy, given all of your expertise, I'm going to think a little bit about, how do you navigate messaging in order to encourage civic participation, especially when politics is seen as so divisive and so polarized? How do we break through? Because at the same time, we recognize that it's engagement that is really the key component as we move forward.
Thank you for asking the question. Basically, the findings are not contradictory, right? Because we're finding that 8 in 10 AAPI adults are saying democracy is core. That's what makes America a great country. But 1/3 of them said, well, the division's tearing us apart. The community still believes in the promise of democracy, but they're frustrated. What we hear on the ground is simple. People are frustrated by the fighting, but they're not checked out. In fact, despite all the concerns about polarization, we've seen encouraging participation in recent elections and primaries. We're also seeing more AAPI candidates and new voices that are energizing the communities and are bringing more people into the process. So that tells us people haven't given up on democracy. They still care deeply about what happens to their families, to their communities. So what APIAVote and what organizations need to do is to brings us back to the basics. Democracy really works best when we invest in engaging with voters early and consistently. Voters are overwhelmed by information. They aren't always sure what to trust. Social media, I mean, people turn to TikTok, YouTube, WeChat. And so these social media is an important tool, but it can't replace direct engagement. So campaigns and organizations that succeed with AAPI voters are the ones that make a deliberate investment in reaching voters. They address issues that people care about, communicate in culturally competent ways, and engage early through mail, door knocking, phone banking, text messages, digital outreach, ethnic media, and trusted messengers on the ground. What we saw recently in New York City is that Mandani invested early in outreach to the different Asian communities and hired organizers who understood these communities to build relationship. Whether you agree with his politics or not, the lesson is simple: is engagement, is intentional, is culturally competent and sustained. And so democracy are not about everyone agreeing on the same idea. So our goal was not to sell one candidate versus another, is to make sure that voters have the information, the confidence, and the opportunity to participate, and to ensure that the campaigns are engaging AAPI communities, because we should be considered a priority, not just an afterthought in the democratic process.
Perfect. No, that's so great. And I completely agree. I mean, right, at the end of the day, as we celebrate 250 years as a nation, it's those fundamentals, right? That it's about the engagement, whether that be Asian Americans or another community. That has long been true of ensuring folks are staying engaged in the democratic process. You know, we have just a little bit more time. I want to talk a little bit about the generational divides and some of the pieces that the data has been revealing. There's this complex picture regarding support for birthright citizenship. We know this has been a hot topic in the last several months, bringing this up again and again in the case before the Supreme Court. 81% of AAPI adults support granting citizenship to children born in the United States to parents who are in the country legally on work visas, but only 54% support granting citizenship to children born in the US to undocumented parents. That would be a major shift in constitutional law if those numbers were to become true. Support for granting citizenship to children born in the US to undocumented immigrants also varies widely depending on age, with 71% of adult supporting granting citizenship to children of undocumented immigrants, but only 37% of API adults 60 and older supporting this. So a massive gulf between these two age cohorts. And we don't have a ton of time left, but how should national advocates and policymakers bridge this generational divide when setting the legislative priorities for the AAPI community? I'm curious your thoughts on.
Oh, I think I caught the end
about
of
this divide.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think we all need to ground our discussions on precedent and history of the United States of America. We're not talking about other countries here. The debate at hand, the discussion at hand is within the United States of America. And this country was founded, as the Supreme Court had written in their 1898 decision for Wong Kim Ark's case, that birthright citizenship is ancient and fundamental to our country. And when our community is polling across all ages, very high numbers about believing in this American dream, birthright citizenship is part of the American dream. And it's not just this, it's not as simple as just determining moving forward. This birthright citizenship case impacts not just proof of citizenship, it impacts healthcare workers, because now the healthcare system has to completely change and overhaul how they're going to determine citizenship of babies being born. Our entire government system has to overhaul how they're double checking, even the elections process, for example. In terms of registering to vote, and because again, only US citizens are allowed to vote, and registration to vote, multiple layers, even just like qualifications for certain federal programs, etc. There have been so many different policies and procedures put in place around that have been grounded in birthright citizenship. So this country is just really built on birthright citizenship. Again, it's ancient and fundamental. And we're talking about the US here. We're not talking about another country. That's how policymakers, advocates should really ground their conversation when talking across generations about this issue.
Amazing. Perfect. Thank you so much. Apologies. It takes me a minute to unmute. You're absolutely right. And really draw on some key tenets and truths there. I want to turn and think a little bit about America's ideals as well. I mean, I think birthright citizenship being one example of them, but also the rise of nativism. AAPIs are more likely to believe what we're seeing from this data, to believe cultural diversity and a mixing of cultures is an integral part of America, which is pretty interesting actually to think about. And they're less likely to believe that Christianity is fundamental to American identity and the rise of nativism. Karthik, you've been studying American identity as it relates to the Asian American experience for decades now. I'm outing you in terms of your age here a little bit. I'm curious your thoughts. What do you make of these findings, particularly in this current moment that we find ourselves?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Now, when I was talking about, I had the opportunity to speak on this at the Chicago Council of Global Affairs a few days ago on America at 250, its standing in the world and how it treats its immigrants. And when I talked about, only 1 in 5 of APIs and less so than the US average believe that a country founded on, by the early European settlers, is fundamental to US identity and it's higher in the general population. And this person said, I'm shocked that it's not zero. Why is it 20%? I don't get it. And I think that itself is interesting, right? And I think the way I would interpret that is a recognition like that's what America is today. It's more of an at least ethno-nationalism is on the rise. That's what it tells me, right? Or maybe they believe, yes, those amazing Europeans, we truly are in that heritage and we need to celebrate it. It's possible. But that's what that tells me. But on religion, see a big gap. And I think it's a reminder for folks, yes, absolutely, we have Christians in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. It's definitely the Pacific Islander community. But among Asian Americans, you have significant Catholic populations among Vietnamese and Filipinos. In the Korean American community, a significant, Protestant and even evangelical population there. But Asian Americans are the most religiously diverse racial group in America. And you have a significant proportion that are either part of minority religions or are agnostic or atheist. And so that's important context to know in terms of how they are experiencing this rise in white Christian nationalism. And I say this as a scholar. I'm not saying this as an activist, I'm not saying this as an advocate. You talked about the scholarship. So outside of public opinion data, one of the books I wrote was The New Immigration Federalism, and that showed how in the post 9/11 period, the market share, at the time we called it ethnic nationalism. This book came out in 2015. Today we would call it white Christian nationalism. We were kind of holding back a little bit. But that period saw a dramatic shift within the Republican Party of Christian nationalists and nativists gaining market share. How did they gain market share? Specifically on immigration, nativists started taking out Republican moderates. There used to be a significant Republican moderate contingent that could be counted on for comprehensive immigration reform, including senators like John McCain and Lindsey Graham. They either took out moderates or threatened to take out moderates, so they had to go more nativist to get reelected. And so really it just shows a massive shift that's happening in the overall US population, but really the work of what we in that book, The New Immigration Federalism, called issue entrepreneurs, right? Restrictionist issue entrepreneurs, people who sought to expand the market share for nativism and for Christian nationalism. And that's also why you saw a fair number of Asian Americans that might have self-identified as Republicans start to move away from the Republican Party. Certainly, racial profiling and what happened after 9/11 by the US government and in civil society made a difference. But it was also a major transformation that happened within the Republican Party. And remember, this happened years before the Tea Party existed. So that's the work that happened in the 2000s. So much so that now it's very difficult for many Asian American donors and voters to feel at home in the Republican Party because nativism and Christian nationalism is dominant. Final thing I'll say, if you have not read the remarks of U.S. Senator Eric Schmidt, junior senator from Missouri, gave a speech at a National Conservative Conference last year where he is unapologetic about this view of America that is not grounded in its civic ideals, but a view of America that is grounded in European culture and Christianity. And he explicitly says that America made a mistake by letting in immigrants, including high-skilled immigrants, that we bargained away for our prosperity a dilution of American racial and religious identity. So this is not a fringe opinion. This is a sitting US senator. We also have similar rhetoric being espoused by Vice President J.D. Vance, who adopts this view of heritage Americans. So that's something that we um, need to keep in mind. So with that, I know we have so I've just been notified we have a special guest here, Sarah. So maybe we can stop the screen share, and I am pleased to introduce Senator Kim. I just mentioned one of your colleagues, Senator Eric Schmidt, who has made not just incendiary remarks, some really shocking views of who he considers to be true American. But before we get into it, we just presented results from our latest survey and heard community perspectives. Let me introduce Senator Andy Kim. I'm not going to read an extensive bio, but he is an impressive person. So let me just read very briefly here. And many of you have seen some of the amazing work he has done, not only recently, but starting from his early days, including seeing what happened during the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Andy Kim is a lifelong public servant who is proud to fight for the needs of New Jersey, the state that gave his family a chance at the American dream just over 50 years ago. After years of service at the Pentagon, State Department, and White House, Senator Kim went on to represent his home community in the House of Representatives for 3 terms before being sworn into the U.S. Senate in December 2024. Senator Kim is focused on building a better future for his 2 little boys and generations to come by lowering everyday costs like healthcare and housing, taking on corruption in all forms, building an economy that uplifts all Americans, and creating a democracy that's reflective of all voices. Senator Kim, welcome to our webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Karthik. I appreciate it. And thank you for everything that you're doing. I've been so in awe of just, the hard work that you and many others are doing to just try to give us the information we need to try to navigate through this tough time. And that's why I wanted to join up here today, just what you were able to present with the data from this survey is impactful and it's important. It should guide our thinking, our analysis of the problems that we're facing. And I'll just pick up where you left off. I mean, I just thought one thing that stood out to me in the data was that data that was saying that only 20% stated that the ideals of early European settlers, including their Christian identity, is key to the country's national identity. This issue about what does it mean to be an American is something that, 250 years in, we're clearly still grappling with and are faced with, uh, a level of change than from what happened when my mom and my dad first came to this country. And I've seen it with my own eyes, and I felt it here in Washington, in the United States Senate. One thing that really stood out to me is that earlier this year, I went to the Munich Security Conference, and I heard Secretary Rubio address this room of European transatlantic leaders. And he talked about just and called America a child of Europe. But he went further and talked about it as a shared need now for Europe and for America as coming from that. And he didn't say tradition, he said civilization. And specifically used that word civilization, saying that we have to fight to protect our civilization. And I'll be honest with you, it made me very uncomfortable because he did get a lot of applause. He did have people who were, I think, were just happy that he wasn't JD Vance that was excoriating them about their own European politics. So they were like, "Oh, look, this is a step up." But as one of only a few people in that room that I felt could clearly identify that their family heritage not coming from a European lineage, like it left me to wonder, well, what place do I have? What is my role in this country? And is my heritage seen as a threat to the civilization that Marco Rubio was laying out? He was giving his own lineage and like back to royalty in Spain, which I did not know about him, but that doesn't make me any less American than him. And I wish I could tell you that this is only in rhetoric, but some of you heard me say before, like I used to work at the State Department where Marco Rubio leads. And when I worked at the State Department, I served this country in war zones in Afghanistan and in Iraq and elsewhere. But this one time I was there at State Department and I received a letter to my office, and I opened the letter, and I read the letter, and my jaw dropped because the letter said that I've now been banned from working on issues related to the Korean Peninsula because they didn't feel like they could trust me. That they did I had already had top secret security clearance. I worked in war zones, risked my life for this country. But while I was in Afghanistan, I didn't realize that my country, my employer, which is my country, was conducting a secret investigation of me without my knowledge, questioning my fit to be able to serve at the State Department, and told me I can't work on my ancestral homeland because they just didn't know if they could trust me. I wasn't even trying to work on Korea issues. I was a Middle East expert. So, like, why were they going about this? So I just share that with you because, these sentiments, they have manifestations in real policy and real consequences on the personnel side, on the funding side, on the policy side. And these debates about who is an American and who can qualify to be an American is very much at the heart of some of the most complicated issues that we face right now. And I say that as someone who has spent the last several weeks immersed within this crisis in my home state regarding an ICE detention center called Delaney Hall, a detention center that, yes, houses detainees of this Central and South American descent, but also Asian descent, as well as other parts of the world. And this is something where I think this through as someone who is the son of immigrants, married to an immigrant that represents a state where over 20% of my state of New Jersey, of 9.5 million people, were born outside the United States. And what does it mean to them that we see within our own state this detention center that is pushing forward on conditions that I believe are inhumane, but also just indefinitely detaining people that have not had their chance to be able to have their day in court. What does that mean for us? What does that mean that we have ICE agents outside the detention center taking very strong, if not overly aggressive, escalating actions against me and others who are trying to protest peacefully the actions that we see happening inside? And so I just raised that again because I was looking at the survey results, and it's saying that 64% responded that the country used to be a great place for immigrants, but no longer remains the case. Um, that is, it's devastating to hear that. I mean, I'm so sad by that, that we are at this place, both in terms of just, first of all, like just who we are as a nation, just what it means that I've grown up in the state that is in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty. And if I might say, the Statue of Liberty is actually technically in New Jersey waters, so let's just leave it at that. Um, but like, that was a fixture in my life. Seeing that statue, seeing what it represents, and now feeling like it's no longer what is being that is no longer the sentiment that is being pushed by our government. Um, that's really tough. My dad came here as a foreign student 50 years ago, and went on to get a PhD in genetics here, not too far from the Statue of Liberty, and then tried to cure cancer and Alzheimer's. My mom, came here to be able to be a nursing student, became a nurse. When I look at the situation now, like with the challenges of getting visas and cutting off foreign students, like I don't actually know if my dad would be able to get into this country if he was trying to today, and what that means for our nation. And it's not just about the values of immigration and our value of being accessible and open as a society, but it's also just devastating to our strategic competitiveness and our global competitiveness when we are taking these actions that are going to hurt our ability to create jobs and innovate and grow businesses and lead the technology of the future, which has just been really tough to see. You can't help but see this as just like shooting ourselves in the foot. And for what purpose? What purpose is that serving? To make it harder for my kids and your kids and grandkids generation to be able to have the opportunities that they need. But look, the data, while it shows us the real concerns and the problems, you still see overwhelmingly people valuing the American dream, overwhelmingly people valuing a democratically elected government and the country's mix of global cultures and values. I take that to heart, and I think that that is representative of the resilience of America. And I think that that is why we all are gathered here together, is because we refuse to believe that the path we are on is the only path that our country can go down. We refuse to believe that things can't change, that things can't get better, and that the AA and HPI community can't play a stronger role. We can. We absolutely can, but we can only do that if we are informed, both about what our community wants and how they feel, but also in terms of the broader nation, in terms of what we are trying to push for. And Karthik and me and others, we've talked about this in terms of the big picture of what's necessary with the U.S. Census, for instance, going forward. I am the ranking member on the subcommittee in the Senate that oversees the census, and I've been trying to think through what can we do on that front to ensure accurate data as dictated by our Constitution, and to not allow the census to become politicized as so much of the rest of government has become. And there are going to be real challenges with that. But also to be able to follow up on this, incredible information that that we've heard about through this presentation, to help us kind of guide through and understand what comes next. As someone who's run and thankfully won 4 elections, I always say it's important to meet people where they're at. And that means make sure that we understand what's on their minds. So listen to them. And hearing this data, to hear the surveys, this is a form of that. But it alone is not enough to be able to make change. The information and the data is only as powerful as our willingness and the willingness of others to learn from that, to be analyzing it, and then to be putting that into action to try to seek the change that we want. And that's on us. That's on all of us listening, all of us participating, as well as being able to share this with others who are not, in this gathering right now, to be able to share that. I'll do my best to share what I have learned and heard with my colleagues in the Senate and in Congress, and look forward to working with you all to be able to do this because it's necessary. These are difficult times. These are dangerous times. And it's really incumbent on us to make sure that we are as strong as possible, working together to be able to change the course of this country. It's happened before. It can happen again. And that's the kind of America that I want to raise my kids in. So thanks so much for letting me be a part of this and to just shine a light on this incredible information and to see how this can guide us going forward.
Thank you so much, Senator Kim. We're on Zoom in a webinar, but I think it's a safe bet that you'd be getting a standing ovation if this were in person. Thank you for speaking so powerfully, personally, noting the challenges we have, but also to know and to give us the confidence and the inspiration to know that we do play an important role here. We are here because of the work of others, including the civil rights movement, in opening the doors for our communities starting in 1965. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that we can continue to do the same for our children, but also for future generations. So thank you so much, and we look forward to working with you, including importantly on the census. As you noted, the census is so fundamental, and we should not do anything to compromise the kind of information there so that we continue to fund programs and that communities, geographies, regions, and communities get the funding that they deserve. So thank you again for joining us, Senator.
Yeah.
Uh, and we look forward to working with you. Back to you, Sarah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Senator Kim. What an incredible opportunity to hear from him today and to hear him weigh in on this important data. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We are out of time for today, but make sure to come back and join us for future briefings. All of this data will be available on our website. You can get the slides and the top line and additional information. Thanks so much for your engagement and participation in our briefing today. Continue to stay up to date on the latest findings at AAPI Data and the AP-NORC websites. As always, feel free to reach out with any questions that you might have. And thank you again to all of our partners and speakers who are joining us today. Have a great day and happy 4th of July.